Welcome everyone to the Viikki Sustainability Research Seminar. This is a part of a research seminar series that we have held in Viikki. And 1.5 years ago, we went totally online. But already when we were in Viikki, we always streamed these seminars and we recorded them. And like you probably have seen that there are recordings of our previous seminars. So this is a really nice seminar series with fairly concise presentations on organized so that there's always 3 presentations on a topic, and then they represent kind of different angles to the same topic. And it's a multidisciplinary seminar, so we try and like bring different angles to that one topic. And my name is Eeva Primmer. I'm from the Finnish Environment Institute, where I'm research director. And SYKE, Finnish Environment Institute, is one of the host organizations of this seminar series. And the other organizations are LUKE, the Natural Resources Institute Finland, and HELSUS, the Helsinki University Sustainability Institute or Center. Apologies that I feel unclear here about that. Okay, but HELSUS anyway, we all know HELSUS. And so, and we always have a speaker from each of the host organizations. And today we have 3 great speakers. We have Vilja Varho from LUKE, Stefan Fronzek from SYKE, and Francesco Minunno from HELSUS. And our topic is scenarios. And we are thinking scenarios because we are trying to think in sustainable development or sustainability terms. We have now defined as our headline scenarios for assessing and generating sustainable pathways. And we have organized this today so that we start from the more qualitative end, how scenarios are made with people, and we go a bit towards how scenarios are about pathways and about predicting, and then finally how scenarios are a part of modeling work and how different errors can be controlled in that work. And our first speaker is Vilja Varho from LUKE, and she will tell us, or maybe I should say what Vilja is, a senior scientist at LUKE. And she will tell about futures research and also how futures research helps us be conscious about the future and actually also seek certain futures. So with that, I would like to welcome Vilja, and please, you can take the floor electronically.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good.
And now we can see your slides.
Okay. Just a second. I assume that you won't be able to see me right now because it tends to close that. Is that okay?
This is really good. We don't see you, or maybe someone does, but in any case, we see your slides well.
Good. Thank you. Yes, thank you. My personal background is in environmental social sciences and futures research. And today I'm not going to talk about actual studies that we've done in futures research unless we have time for that in the sort of aftermath, the last 30 minutes or so chatting. Instead, I thought I would start from rather basic assumptions about what futures research is about, because I thought it might be somewhat unfamiliar field to you. We of course know that sustainability science is future oriented. From 1972, the limits of growth showed us how certain trajectories would lead to unsustainable futures, and this connects us very closely. I thought I found a definition to futures research saying that systematic, holistic, interdisciplinary and critical long-term analysis of themes regarding future and of alternative future developments. And I think this is rather close to what sustainability science is in a way. And these certain main starting points that we have in futures research, which is a scientific discipline that you can study in the University of Turku, is that future cannot be predicted. So we're not making predictions about the future, and we don't have any crystal balls. Instead, future can be affected, and that's why it's in plural, futures rather than future studies. There are alternative future possibilities. And in the beginning of the development of this field, there was quite a lot of discussion of whether it can be a scientific discipline if it studies something that by very definition does not yet exist. And then there has been discussion of, can futures research make normative judgments about good future? And I will talk a little bit about this. I really liked a definition or an idea by Ilkka Niiniluoto, who defined futures research as a design science rather than descriptive science. So it's not trying really to describe how things are like biology does or physics, but rather how we should do things like engineering or agricultural science. And the point is to know what we would need to do in a situation A if we want to reach situation B. What I have mainly been studying is the alternative situations B, C, D, and E, and sort of expanding the ideas of what might be, so that we can make better judgments about where we want to head. So basically, futures research studies what would possible, probable, and preferred futures be like. Often I think we actually study what current people think about what the possible futures could be like. But since we don't really have that much better information than what currently exists, this is kind of what we have to go with. And a lot of the studies that I have done have been about the asking various experts what they think could happen. These are the possible futures. But I've asked them to describe what is the most probable future that they think is going to happen regarding a particular theme. And then also, what is the preferable future? If everything would go in the best possible way, what would that future look like? And why do we ask the same, these two things from same people? Well, first, a lot of the time, people tend to think that the probable is what has been before, although things change constantly, but it can be sort of business as usual. And preferable not only expands our thinking, but also it brings different values of different experts or other stakeholders to light. And so when we study this, we can sort of see that there are alternative ideas. What could be preferred to someone is not necessarily preferred to another one. Actually, if I go back to this, we did a study on the future of CO2 emissions from Finnish transport. And of course, everybody wanted the CO2 emissions to decline. But how they decline, is it maybe more of a question of technological development, for example, electric cars like we see now? Or is it more about changing how we move and whether we move? This corona situation has forced us all to work at home. So it has really shown us that there are alternatives when desired, but not everybody wants this. So these issues come to light when we discuss the preferable future as well. Futures consciousness is very much a human trait. It is the awareness of future events and preparing for them and making plans. So even the prehistoric people who prepared these stone tools, they were preparing them and carrying them with the awareness that they would need them later. So this is a very old idea, but it can be developed and to some extent measured. But most importantly, I think it is important to think about out of the box. You know, someone thought that what if we made this kind of stone tool and carried it with me? Wouldn't it be convenient? And this is what, of course, takes us further. I'm using here a definition by scientists from Finland Futures Research Center, who call it the capability that a person or an organization has for comprehending possible future developments and their impacts on our present situation, as well as the impacts of our present choices on the future. And they have divided this into 5 different sort of parts. First being time perspective, that you're able to look at into the future, see how things might change, and see that things don't change at the same pace. Also, the agency believes that we can affect the future and understand who can and how they can affect the future. Being openness to alternatives, systems perception, so that you understand that things don't evolve on their own, but they're always connected and within a system. And then this last one, which I think is very important, this concern for others, that we care about the future, we care about what's going to happen to the people in the future. In fact, now that we talk about the sort of deciding which way we want to go, what is preferable, it would not be nice if we could know what the people in the future prefer, but of course we can't know that. So we have to make decisions based on our own values and our own ideas about what is desirable. There have been futurists like Wendell Bell who have thought that certain values are so universal that we could sort of make decisions based on those, but I don't believe that, because I think the interpretation or the actual sort of application of a particular value varies. And what, for example, in this transport case, everybody wants CO2 emissions go down, yes, but how do we do it? What does it cost? Who does it cost to? And so on. So this is difficult. And one of the last points that I would like to make here is that in futures research, we distinguish between future images and scenarios. So that the image about a future state is like a photo. If we want to know what the Finnish transportation is like in 2050, we take a photo. That's an image about the future. And scenario really should tell the story from present to the future state and take these steps. And futures research is very much a methodology science, and there are always new ways that we develop to construct these scenarios. But the last thing is backcasting. I'm only just introducing it, but the idea is that when you look for the ways to a desirable future, here you have a number of scenarios. Here you have selected one scenario, one future that you want to reach, and you try to find the path looking from back, okay, if we want to be here in 2050, what do we have to achieve by 2045 or 2030 or so on. And you can also have alternative futures and try to find paths from those. And this is, of course, gets quite complicated, and in terms of resources, it's expensive, but this can all be a tool of finding what the different paths might look like, and also, of course, sharing those results. This was my very brief presentation. I hope it wasn't too basic, and I'm happy to have any answers. Sorry, any questions that you have.
Thank you, Vilja. I think that this was a really great kind of taking us to the same room, if you like. Very good. It would be good if anyone has questions, you could try and use your hand function, and I try to scroll, or you can just put your mic on and ask, because it's not sure that I always see everything, but now I don't see any hands. So it would be good to have if anyone has any questions. And while others are waiting, I could ask Vilja that this way that you talk in very sort of principle terms, do you get to talk like this with scenario modelers and people who do quantitative work? Do you get this? Is that a part of your project work?
It's not normally part of my project work. No, normally I do this in a qualitative way, although sometimes we ask the experts to give us numbers. Of course, they are based on their own judgments, so it's not the same as from modeling. But numbers are sometimes very useful for understanding the difference between different futures. And I think it would be really good if there was more collaboration between modeling and sort of more qualitative work. We have tried to get funding for those sometimes, but failed to do it so far.
Excellent. Any questions? Would be good. If you have questions, you can also then, well, okay, because what we do is we have more time to discuss then at the end. If you don't have questions now directly to Vilja, it might be that you come up with questions to Vilja once you have heard the next presentation, because these will somehow bring different angles and there might be interesting comparisons to make. So maybe we go forward. Remember that you can ask questions from Vilja, or you can also type in the chat and Vilja can answer there, or I can raise that to the discussion then after the next speaker, who is Stefan Fronzek. And Stefan is from SYKE, and where he is a senior research scientist at the climate strategic program for climate change. And Stefan works with a scenario framework that's called shared socio-economic pathways. And in some way, they are assumptions like what Vilja was describing, but they are very much agreed on. And then Stefan applies these and analyzes them in different contexts. And that's how what Stefan will talk about. And he will particularly talk about climate change risks, how they can be analyzed with these socio-economic pathways. So with that, Stefan, I would give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Eeva, for the introduction. I try to share.
We can see you and your slides, but not in the presentation mode yet. And then if you do this, what Eeva Lotta told you to do before, because now we see the presenter's view.
Can you now see the right?
Yeah, now we see correct. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Vilja, for your presentation. That was actually excellent. I think this was the sort of thing I was wondering whether I need to add to my presentation. So that is actually very, very nicely leading to in what I want to talk about. So I'm giving a presentation, as Eeva said, about a scenario framework that is being used in climate change research and also climate change policy making. And this presentation, I've put this together very much with the help of my colleague Timothy Carter. So I'd like to acknowledge him. He actually provided most of these slides that I'm showing here, and I think he's also here in the meeting. So he's the real expert. If we have questions that I cannot address, then I hope Tim will be there also. So what I want to talk about is that scenarios for climate change research, the need for those, and this is very, very similar to what Vilja just said, is that scenarios are alternative and plausible images of how the future can unfold. And they're actually not forecasts or predictions, but they help us to explore developments that are very uncertain, which is, if we look at the long term, like we do in climate policy making and also climate research, we often look kind of decades or 100 years ahead. There are very uncertain developments that we have to capture. And then also the future possible potential climate change impacts and responses to those, they depend both on the changes in climate as well as in the changes in the socio-economic conditions. So this scenario framework that I want to talk about, this kind of encaptures both of these. And as Eeva mentioned, it's abbreviated the SSP, Shared Socioeconomic Pathways, and the general framework for these scenarios I want to introduce now. So we these scenarios have been developed by the scientific community, and they divided the different developments for the future under two axes: challenges to mitigation on the one axis and challenges to adaptation. And then they filled kind of this space with different scenario fields, counting from 1 to 5. So it's SSP1 to SSP5. And these scenarios, which I will introduce in a moment, there has been a paper a couple of years ago that provided narratives, which are kind of a one-paragraph sketch text that shortly describes each of these 5 scenarios, and alongside with a 2 to 3 page storyline that describes these scenarios as the global narratives and storylines, providing kind of future prospects under very much divergent directions for the 21st century. And alongside these text descriptions, storylines, there are also a number of quantitative elements. They include population projections, other indicators like the level of urbanization, rates of technological change, the development and income distribution. And all of these are being put in a global database, which the address is shown on this slide, that provides quantitative numbers for these indicators for each of these shared socioeconomic pathways. Many of those are on a country level for all countries of the world, and some of the indicators are kind of on larger world regions. So there's a lot of material that is kind of behind these scenarios, and that can be used in various kinds of studies and policy making. And
one small thing is that we don't see the right-hand edge of the slide. So you did very well describing all the bullets,
Yeah.
but we see basically population, urbanization rates of something, and so on. So either you can try to change the view, or then you have to be very careful in how you speak about the right-hand side. Now
Okay.
we see it. Wonderful, thank you.
Is it better? Is it now? Okay,
It's
right.
good now, yeah.
Okay, thanks for telling that. And then these scenarios, they have been developed over the past 10 years or so, or a bit longer, like the first elements of those. And there has been a recent review a year ago, O'Neill et al., that has looked at the literature from these first 10 years. And there have been over 1,000 papers that either kind of took part in developing elements of these SSPs or that have used them in different aspects. So it's very widely used kind of the scenario framework. And then I quickly introduce these 5 SSPs. They go from, if I use the pointer here, the SSP1 on the bottom left has low challenges to adaptation to climate change, as well as low challenges to mitigation, and it's a scenario of sustainability, and it got the label "Taking the Green Road." Then we have I go clockwise here, the SSP5. It's with larger challenges to mitigation. It's a fossil fuel development taking the highway. So it's kind of strong economic growth. The SSP3 is called regional rivalry or rocky road, which has kind of blocks of regions that are not interacting very much, except of maybe increased numbers of war, maybe part of that. The SSP4 is a scenario of inequality. The road divided is where there are elites in countries living under very good conditions, rich people, but they live very separated from kind of the masses of the people who may have kind of less economic development and also less access to resources. So it's a very unequal world. And in the middle, there's the SSP2, middle of the road, where many aspects, the kind of trajectories to the future, are kind of taken middle road. And these SSPs, which are shown in this matrix here on the rows, can, for each of those, can be combined with different levels of so-called radiative forcing, which causes different levels of climate global warming on the other axis here. And what you can see here is in in yellow that for each SSP you actually it's possible to reach different levels of radiative forcing and hence also different levels of climate warming. So the point here to make is that under each of these SSP worlds we may actually introduce different levels of mitigation that bring us down to a lower level of climate warming. So that's maybe the concept here, that it's still consistent with a world that is called sustainability, that has the same assumptions, but where kind of less mitigation policies are being introduced that keeps you to a higher level of climate warming. And in the same way, the SSP5, the second one here, is actually consistent to the whole range of climate futures, ranging from very low mitigation scenarios to high-end emission scenarios. And these can be combined for the socio-economic futures with the climate futures, and the ones that are grayed out are the ones that are being regarded as implausible by the end of this century. So the blue points are the plausible combinations that where the assumptions of the scenarios are consistent with emissions that result into radiative forcing levels, and that again result into different levels of climate warming. So this gives kind of the scenario framework to pick from. So if we do scenario analysis in the kind of regional studies or sector-based analysis, there's always the choice to be made from these 27 possible integrated scenarios. And this figure is from the IPCC report that was published in the summer, the AR6 of the Working Group 1. And what you can see here is the global warming projections until the end of the century. You see 5 different lines, and for each of those, it gets labels of these different SSPs. But I wanted to highlight here that actually what determines the level of warming is the radiative forcing level. So here the 8.5 refers to a radiative forcing level of 8.5 watts per square meter, and for the other ones also. And in these simulations, they have been combined with assumptions of socioeconomic development under these SSPs. But if they were taken from the previous slide of the matrix, a different combination with this radiative forcing, say SSP4 with 8.5, you would actually get nearly identical lines here. And another point to make from this graph is that obviously with increasing, if you go further into the future, the differences between the scenarios, they tend to become larger, as well as the uncertainty within each scenario. And another point I want to mention is the extension of these global narratives for kind of regional studies. I show 1 or 2 examples from our work in Finland. This first one is we developed socioeconomic narratives for the Finnish agriculture and food sector. We started with the same kind of global narratives, the same 5 SSPs, and we did this in the stakeholder workshops, which we held in Finnish. So we translated these to having Finnish titles, and we also decided that we actually did not want to look at the SSP2, the middle of the road, because we thought the other ones are diverging more and they're more interesting to study. And this, I don't want to go into the details here, but we had a certain methodology, and Vilja already said that there were methods for scenario development is ranging very widely, and we have come up with one method that where the key input is a stakeholder workshop here and some interaction after this workshop, and the result of these workshops are kind of narratives, storylines for this sector, for Finland, for each of these 4 SSPs that we looked at. And we published this in the paper on the right. And one glimpse of the result, this is one table from this paper, is you can see for a number of different indicators that are relevant for the sector, for each of the SSPs, we present qualitative trend lines, how these would develop into the future. So if we take one example, kind of the meat and dairy-based diet, so would decrease under the sustainability scenario, and they would increase under the SSP3 and SSP4, and they would largely remain the same under the SSP5. These are kind of the results or our interpretation of what has been discussed in the stakeholder workshop. Another similar example is currently in process, where we have held already a workshop focusing on the health and social welfare sector. Also in Finland, national scale, we held a workshop 2 years ago. We went through a very similar process and are currently in the process of kind of finalizing the analysis of the workshop results and writing it up in a paper. And kind of some preliminary results have been published already in an info sheet from our project where we develop these scenarios. There are other examples also relevant in Finland. For instance, for the Baltic Sea region, there's one paper that developed SSPs for Baltic Sea region, Baltic Sea related issues, and another paper focusing on the Barents region, where kind of the northern parts of Finland are part of those study regions. So there are different studies where they developed similar narratives for the SSPs. And then the topic of the seminar today is how scenarios can actually help to assess sustainable pathways. And I want to quickly show some ideas here, which is if we would measure kind of system sustainability on the axis here in some way, then we can show kind of our descriptive scenarios, the SSPs that I just presented, how they develop over time and they diverge. And this is just an illustration, so that this is just that doesn't show any real numbers. So with the SSPs, we have descriptive scenarios which are global in scope, and they explore allow you to explore integrated society climate scenarios. And we can also downscale the climate. We can also develop regional SSP extensions that bring us to local or regional issues. And these provide reference scenarios for stress testing policies. That's one of the application of those. But what we actually may want to achieve, we may actually call visions or also normative scenarios. And Vilja mentioned some aspects of those. And these the visions is where we want to be, and these could be defined, for instance, with the Sustainable Development Goals. That would be one way to define these visions, and there are also policy targets that relate to climate, which define steps that may lead us that may be kind of halfway towards these visions, and they would be they're about where we should be heading. And what you can see here already is that in this illustration, the descriptive scenarios, the SSPs, they actually fall short of reaching the visions. And to be able to get to these visions, adaptation, mitigation pathways can be developed, and where we, consistent with each of the scenarios, we try to find choices and actions that help us to reach a target, a policy target, or the vision. And the important point to make here is that there's also flexibility of jumping between different pathways that could be developed, and realizing synergies between different pathways. And then finally, one quick point to make also is what I show here is the wildcard, which are kind of events with often very low probability, but potentially high impact or singular shock events, which can disturb what happens under these scenarios. Our current pandemic, COVID pandemic, is a very good example of a wildcard. So one could also study how under each of these scenarios, how our society could react to kind of a wildcard event like a pandemic, or other events have been used in the literature also. So they are useful for stress testing. And I show.
Very good, Stefan. You promised that I can tell you about time, that it's good if you wrap up soon so that we can have.
Okay, thanks. Good that you mentioned it. So I wanted to show one example from an EU project called Impressions, and I make this very short. So in that EU project, we developed visions also with the help of stakeholders, And then we also in another stakeholder workshop, we developed pathways for adaptation and also for mitigation, and they some of those are consistent with all of the SSPs that are studied, and some of these pathways are not consistent with some of the SSPs. So that's the point to make here. So just to mention that this was actually done in practice, and we then also try to measure how much closer we get to our vision of sustainability. And this is shown in these spider diagrams where different sustainability indicators were used from the scenario originally, and then they modified under adaptation and mitigation pathways. And with that, I come to my conclusion, and I introduced to you the current scenario framework, very much widely in use, called Shared Social Economic Pathways, SSPs. These are global descriptive scenario, very widely used, and very widely used in research and policy making. And I showed you some examples of their regional extensions, and but they can also be used for scenario applications and have been used in Finland and many other regions in the world also. And since these SSPs do not necessarily reach a high level of sustainability, which we can define in visions or normative scenarios, adaptation and mitigation pathways are kind of tools to bring these SSPs closer to the vision. And with that, I'd like to finish here. I list a number of projects where this work is coming from. So you.
Very good. Very nice, Stefan. Now that Vilja didn't get questions, so I will have to do so. This was very nicely building now on Vilja's presentation. So if anyone has a question that would nicely sort of address both presentations, there is one discussion in the chat, Stefan. It's interesting for you about temperature changes and how these scenarios that you are talking about predict the temperature, for example, in Finland. And I assume that Tim has actually been answering these questions, but do you want to say something about how we can actually predict climate change with this work?
I could actually ask the question if okay.
Yeah, please, Tanya. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find the hand sign here for some reason, so I just barged in and interrupted you. But yeah, I'm Tanya Suni from the Ministry of the Environment, and I was just asking about the first slide where you had all those scenarios, and you had the radiative forcing, and then you had something that you denoted as delta T, so that was a change in temperature, and it was unclear to me which kind of time window it was referring to. So we were discussing this with Tim there in the chat. And now I'm under the impression that it is a time window from 2070 to 2099, and that the delta T referred to the temperature that would be that we would have then compared to the pre-industrial time, or perhaps to the present time. And I was slightly kind of surprised because we just went through these numbers with some people in FMI in this futures work that we did with the government, and they didn't seem quite to add up. So I was just curious about this. So it will be from a government point of view, in general, from my point of view, I'm originally from INAR, so I'm a climate physicist or atmospheric physicist, but now I'm at the ministry, and I could just say as a general comment that from my perspective right now, this was really interesting, but it would have been even more useful for me if I could have seen kind of a snapshot of what Finland would look like in each of these scenarios.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So temperature would be one thing, but I mean, what would it look like? I mean, would we have a functioning, let's say, food production system in the worst scenario, or would everything be destroyed, or, you know, where would the sea level be, or would we still have winters and things like this? But I understand that wasn't the focus of your presentation. I totally understand that, but just as a small comment.
Well, thank you very much. And certainly we have a lot of information about future projections of climate itself and also the socioeconomic changes. And in this presentation, there simply wasn't the time to present all of those. The numbers from that figure that you refer to, they're actually temperature changes by the end of this century in Finland. And so the kind of the global warming levels that are shown on the next slide, they are on the global level, and they refer to the relative to pre-industrial levels, whereas on the figure before they're for Finland, so they cannot be the same.
And could I just add to that? This is Tim Carter. Hi. We've had this offline discussion, but in that original figure, the earliest figure, that was from the previous assessment, for which there's been already quite some extensive work done in Finland on the local temperature changes over Finland. Having said that, there is new work already ongoing, and it may have been used even in the Suomi project from the AR6, the new simulations, and they were the ones that Stefan showed in the second slide for the globe. And there are some differences, but I don't know whether we actually have numbers for Finland. Maybe the Suomi project even was able to reflect some of those new simulations. I don't know about that. Yeah, we have loads of information, so it's really probably an offline discussion that we should have with a bit more time available.
This is great. It's all great. It's wonderful, and I hope that the audience is now thinking that wow, there's a lot of detail, and also seeing, for me, I'm not from this scenarios, like disciplinarily, I have worked quite sort of on the fringes of this type of work. For me, it has always been interesting how powerful this scenario work is, just in the way that Tanya's question triggered. We are discussing that, this has already been fine-tuned in this way, or it has been used in another way. And this is very exciting, and it's worth chatting about more. But as a chair, I have the privilege and also a bit painful role of just cutting the discussion now. We can continue afterwards. We have a good half an hour where we are kind of chatting freely without chairing after this at 4 o'clock. But we would like to hear also the last presentation by Francesco Minunno, who is at the University of Helsinki, where he's a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Forest Sciences. And Francesco will talk about climate change and management of Finnish forests with simulations. And this continues on something like in a way in a concrete area of forests, but it is very much about modeling and also the errors in this modeling. So with that, I would like to give the floor to Francesco. And we see your slides, but I'm not sure that you have.
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, very good. Good.
Thanks for the nice presentation, introduction, and thanks to Stefan and Vilja for the nice presentation. I'm Francesco Minunno, and I work at the University of Helsinki with Aniki Makela, and I'm going to speak about the integration of climate scenarios and management scenarios in forest modeling. And I would like also to focus on the uncertainty quantification of this modeling framework. And I'm focusing, sorry, I cannot change.
Okay. Good. Looks good.
Yeah, so I'm focusing on the modeling of forests ecosystem, and all we know that the forest have an active role in the reduction of the impact of climate change, but at the same time they are vulnerable to those changes, and we need to plan good mitigation and adaptation strategies in order to reduce the emissions and enhance the sinks of carbon, but also to reduce the vulnerability of our ecosystems. And in particular for forests, we have a temporal scale challenge. And what I mean is that what we do now in the forest, our interventions have an impact that is going to affect the forest for the next decades. So we have to be really careful when we plan our interventions. And in this sense, the models are really useful tools to at least try to see what are the possible impacts of climate and management. Just to give an overview, I'm briefly going to speak about the model building process. So how we create robust and reliable models, how we, then I'm going to show some application of our model to the Finnish forest. And then I'm going to talk about the importance of uncertainty quantifications and the integration of data in this, the continuous integration of data in this modeling framework. So the first key step in the process development is to build a model and create a model structure that can be seen as the DNA of the model. Then another aspect that is really important is the inputs of the model. We need good inputs to have robust and reliable predictions. And in this aspect, the scenarios play a role in a sense that we input different climate or management scenarios. And then the other aspect that is really important is the calibration, where we train the model, but at the same time, we use probabilistic approach to estimate the uncertainties of the model. And other aspects that we have to consider when we do modeling is the spatio-temporal scale. We need the right model for the modeling exercise that we want to implement. We always have to find a compromise between complexity and applicability, because we have computational load and input availability that could hamper the model exercises. And then we should always aim to use model computational techniques based on probability statistics and to quantify uncertainties. And what I would like also to emphasize in this presentation is that the modeling framework that we are trying to build, and in my view should be applied, is something that should be always flexible and dynamic. What I mean is that the structure of the model should be always easily updated, and when we create a model framework, we should always be able to integrate new data every time they are available. So at the University of Helsinki, we use many models, but one of these is, and I've been working a lot in the last years, is the PREVAS model. That is a simple model that is meant for large-scale simulation about forest productivity, carbon balance, and water balance. The inputs are weather inputs at daily time step. We have site information. We also, the initial state of the forest is an input, and then we can input also the forest management. The model has been calibrated for Finland with using extensive data sets and also been tested. And we use a Bayesian approach that is a statistic based on probability. So now we have the model, and we can apply the model, and we can use the model to estimate, for instance, the carbon balance, the source and sinks of carbon on large areas. Like in this case, we were working on the Kokemäenjoki river basin at 16 by 16 meter resolution. And then we can start inputting in the model the different scenarios. So we see here different climate scenarios and climate models, climate scenarios, and management scenarios. And we can start identifying the areas where we expect the highest changes in productivity, but also we can play with the harvesting levels and try to implement a management that is more sustainable. And also we can focus on the protection, looking at the biodiversity. What I'm trying to say is that we can play with all these scenarios and try to identify the trade-offs between the multiple resources that the forest provides, like carbon, biodiversity, and wood production. But something that is really important is also to quantify the uncertainty, because when we do a model prediction, there is always uncertainty related with that prediction. It's not just one line, but there is some uncertainty around that line, and we should always quantify that uncertainty, quantify the importance of different factors on this uncertainty. So then we can see how much of the parametric uncertainty in the model affects the uncertainty in the predictions, how much of the scenarios is going to affect the predictions, and how this uncertainty propagates in the future. And this uncertainty quantification should be also done on at a spatial scale. So for instance, here we can see the different weight that model parameters, global circulation models, emission scenarios, and management scenarios have on the output of the model at one site in central Finland and one site in the north. And we can see here the management is really important, as high weight on the uncertainty, while the scenarios uncertainty weight increases over time. And the management is much less important in the north, where the forests are less productive. And finally, what I want to emphasize is also that the modeling framework should be flexible and dynamic. And we, as I said before, we should always try to update our models and also integrate new data every time they are available. And in this sense, the data simulation is a science that allows to integrate new data in a probabilistic way in the modeling framework. And I'm bringing here an example from a study that we did to integrate Sentinel-2 data, so satellite data at 10 by 10 meter resolution in this modeling framework to monitoring the carbon balance of the forest. So we have 3 areas of 100 by 100 square kilometers, and we initialize the model using data from the first satellite measurement. So we have the data and the relative uncertainty. Then we use the model to forecast the state of the forest and the carbon balance in the future. And then we combine these predictions with the new satellite data that become available in the second step. And then we come up with a new estimate of the state of the forest that is potentially more accurate and less uncertain. And we keep doing this over time, reducing the uncertainty and improving the predictions and the monitoring of carbon on large areas. And then we can draw maps about the state of the forest and the carbon fluxes. So to conclude, I think we need robust and reliable models to predict the impact of climate change and see what is the management that we should apply in the future. And nowadays there are many computational techniques that support our model development. And also we need to quantify the uncertainties. It's really important that we quantify the uncertainties to better understand the modeling forecast, but also to improve the accuracy of the predictions. And then there is the need of updating the model and to integrate new data in the system. So thanks for the attention.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you very much, Francesco, and it was a very good final presentation in this, going from the more sort of starting from the kind of principles, like I said earlier, to really this kind of fine-tuning with data. So this was very good. Any questions to Francesco or the other speakers? We got into good speed with the discussion just before. Stefan has a question, please.
Yes, Francesco, thanks a lot. That was very interesting, and I very much like that modeling work. I have one question for the forest management scenarios that you have been touching upon, and the question is basically how that relates to the topic of my presentation. Do you see a possibility that these management scenarios can actually be linked to kind of different developments of Finland as a whole, or are these just kind of very technical decisions that each forest owner actually makes, or like what is how important is the society for these management scenarios?
Yeah, thanks. No, these management scenarios are at country scale. So these are the levels that we want to, harvesting levels that we want to have at country scale, and then we integrate these management scenarios for the different climate scenarios. So then we can see the impacts. There is no feedbacks from the management scenarios and the climate scenarios. Do you know what I mean? So if the management scenario is going to reduce the CO2 concentration, then we take different paths, and then so this would be the next.
But I wonder, are there maybe management scenarios that are more consistent with a society that is kind of in a green society versus kind of a fossil fuel society? So,
well, so far we applied the different scenarios for the different the different management scenarios to each of the climate scenarios without a clever way to selecting, but this is a good point. And
yeah, no, I think that this is overall, this is a great sort of thought to finish with, because we stop recording at 4. Don't go away from the space if you want to speak to the speakers. The speakers have agreed to stay here until 4:30. Unfortunately, I have to go soon, but the idea is that you are in the lobby or in the seminar room after the presentations are over, and you can have a good chat without sharing. You can turn the cameras on and have a nice discussion. But I think that this final question about how much and also it relates to Vilja's presentation about backcasting, that how do we relate this kind of quite technical choices that we make when we are doing the scenario work, and particularly when we are modeling, to the signals that we see in the society. And also Tanya's question earlier was really about this. So that's a really nice place to end the formal part of the seminar. I will remind, and I will paste it here, I think, in the chat if I still have it here, what our next, no, I don't have it, unfortunately. I will paste in the chat really soon the title of our next seminar, and I will try and find it here. If I find, our next seminar is on the 27th of October, and it's on sustainability and digitalization, opportunities and risks. And then we have another seminar coming up in November, and that is on risk analysis and sustainability in climate, nature and environment impacts. And so these are our this autumn seminars, and then if you have more ideas, we can take them up for our for next term, if you like. Okay, so with that, thank you everyone. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Tanya, our active audience, and thank you to everyone. But don't go away if you want to chat. Just the formal part is over now. Thanks.